The Groucho Letters, Letters from and to Groucho Marx. Introduction by Arthur Sheekman. When the publishers first suggested that his letters be put into a book, Groucho, a diffident man, well, fairly diffident, beat about no bushes. He wired back, "Your letter received and promptly burned. I prefer not to have strangers prying into my mail. Would discuss this in detail, but my secretary has a date in 5 minutes with me." Then, after a sporadic correspondence tapered off into silence, the publishers went about their business, and Groucho went about his, which at the time consisted of bicycle trips to the A&P, weekly appearances on television, letter writing, becoming a legend, and having his feet scratched, a diversion enjoyed by all of the Marx brothers. What the significance of this is, I cannot tell you. I know only that, as a hobby, Groucho devotes most of his time to reading and accosting strangers, especially if the strangers happen to be girls. If they are girls, they don't usually remain strangers long. On entering a theater, his conversation with the usher is likely to start with the question, "What is it tonight, sad or high-kicking?" Or, if in a mood to parody the small-time comedians, he might say to a waiter or waitress, "Have you got frog legs?" And no matter what the reply, Groucho will look painfully disappointed and say, "No, that's the wrong answer. You were supposed to say, 'No, it's rheumatism that makes me walk that way.'" Although the comedian's reluctance to publishing his letters was genuine, it was by no means fanatical. It was overcome by two things. One, the suggestion that the book include also letters written to as well as by him. This was persuasive indeed, since his correspondents, whom I'll get to in a moment, are among the English-speaking world's wittiest men. And two, there was that official communication from Washington. It asked Groucho to donate his personal papers to the Library of Congress, where they would be permanently stored, for the edification, no doubt, of future scholars who might be engaged in a study of the comic viewpoint. Surely they would want to know something about the mind of a man who, on giving up his membership in a Hollywood club, wrote to its president, "Please accept my resignation. I don't care to belong to any club that will have me as a member." There, in a few satirical words, is one of the most astute and revealing observations about the self-hating, socially unambitious human animal. As PS 84's most prominent dropout, Groucho was of course impressed by the Library of Congress's request for his papers. After all, he had spent less time in academic classrooms than in the classroom act called Fun in High School. Although not yet out of his teens, Groucho was his brother's teacher, and while obviously no great shakes at spelling, he did manage to bring a fresh approach to the subject of geography. When he asked Harpo the shape of the world, Harpo, he had not yet turned exclusively to pantomime, said candidly that he didn't know. Whereupon Groucho gave him a hint. "What," he asked, "is the shape of my cuff buttons?" "Square," from Harpo. "I mean the cuff buttons I wear on Sunday, not every day. Now, what is the shape of the world?" "Round on Sunday, square on weekdays," replied Harpo, who shortly after took his vow of professional silence. Groucho can honestly say with Falstaff that he is not only witty himself, but the cause of wit in other men. Most of the letters written to him are richly seasoned with the comic spirit. That most of them are from professional writers is not surprising, since most of Groucho's friends are professional writers. If there is very little correspondence between the brothers, it's because they were not apart often, or for any considerable length of time. Besides, Groucho is the one member of the family with a passion for letters. Chico's writing was pretty much limited to the signing of checks, payable to card players, who, he was convinced, were less skillful at games than himself. To prove that this was so, Chico spent most of his happy, carefree life and money. As for dear, eternally boyish Harpo, his friends, like Groucho's, were mostly writers. And yet Harpo liked to pretend, for comic effect, that he was completely illiterate. Shortly after our first meeting, I had been brought to Hollywood to help prepare a Marx Brothers movie script. Harpo asked me to tell him how to make a J. I can recall another meeting when I found him impishly answering a letter he had received, exactly 5 years before, from S.N. Berman, the playwright. It is sometimes said that Brother Groucho is a comical fellow because he will say boldly, and of course quickly, what the rest of us might think but are too timid to say. This is less than half true. What really distinguishes his comic impudence is not boldness, but wit. Of course, the darts sometimes miss their mark. Need I tell you? Babe Ruth struck out more than once. As an example of Groucho's amusing insolence, I remember a remark he made at a large formal dinner given for his television sponsor. As a tribute to the boss's 25 years with the corporation, his employees had bought him an expensive gift, which Groucho was asked to present. He did. Rising to his feet, he turned to his sponsor and, indicating the beautifully wrapped parcel, said, "Charlie, as a token of their devotion, the men working for you have bought you this gift. What it is, I'm not sure, but if I were you, I wouldn't open the package until it's been submerged in a tub of water." His wit can also be gently withering. Do you remember a magazine called Confidential? Until it was put out of business by lawsuits, or was it the Postal Department? It specialized in slimy scandals about movie people. I suppose that some of their stories were true, or partly true. More often they were neither, but that didn't make them any less feared by the stars who, when a new issue came out, skimmed through their copies with trembling hands to see if any of the current dirt had been tossed in their direction. When the magazine printed a page, comparatively tepid, about Groucho, accusing him of liking girls, a fact that he has certainly not denied, he was annoyed but said nothing. However, a month or two later, when Confidential implied that his quiz show was crooked, that was going too far. Turning resolutely to his typewriter, Groucho dashed off the following warning. "Confidential magazine, gentlemen, if you continue to publish slanderous pieces about me, I shall feel compelled to cancel my subscription. Sincerely, Groucho Marx." There is a funny man. Arthur Sheekman. Well, I guess we'd better put in 2 letters, let's say. To members of Groucho's Poker Club, March 25th, 1944. To Mr. Arthur Sheekman, Mr. Harry Tugend, Mr. Irving Brecker, Mr. Harry Krenitz, Mr. Nat Perrin, gentlemen. As you know, the taxes today are as high as an elephant's eye, to coin a phrase that I just stole from Oscar Hammerstein. And therefore, a single man has very little chance to lay anything aside. I am writing this letter to you because you are the charter members of our poker club. In recent weeks, there has been a shocking increase in absenteeism, and instead of the 7 sad familiar faces that I have grown to tolerate, a number of corrupt and unfamiliar pans have begun to appear around the green baize. Ostensibly, the original purpose of the Tuesday night meetings was to give us all an opportunity to see each other more or less regularly, and incidentally, to play a little poker. But now that our little group is at an advanced stage of decay, I, for one, want to confess that my purpose in participating in the game was to gather a weekly minimum of 30 non-taxable dollars. This non-taxable money meant a lot to me. It provided me with shelter and firewood. It clothed me and fed me, and I needed every dollar of it desperately. But to change the tense, eager as I am to get this money, I'm not willing to spend my Tuesday nights with a group of loutish and unkempt strangers. Therefore, gentlemen, for future evidence of your good faith, I would like some assurance that you will be present each week, either a deposit of a substantial sum. If this is not feasible, perhaps you would be willing to leave in escrow some small valuable piece of jewelry. In closing, I want to say, we are all lone travelers in a world bristling with enemies. We all need something spiritual to cling to. Not to get too sentimental, I sincerely believe that we need each other, just as man needs woman, and a cat house. The Tuesday night game should not be abandoned. I feel that it contributes something to our lives. As you know, I am a single man, and my tax is as high as an elephant's eye. Sincerely yours, Groucho Marx. To Irving Brecker, New York, December 16, 1940. Dear Breck, this is either a day for writing the early stages of a honeymoon, or 15 grains of opium. It's raining, a very pretty rain, not the spasmodic kind that we get in California, but a long, steady one, the kind they show in the newsreels, with the natives sitting on the rooftops with their cattle, wives, and chickens. I know nothing about the radio situation, and I presume you know about as much. I thought the show we gave that night was good, but I have a hunch there is a deep-seated aversion to accepting me in any role other than the one I have always played. Our tour east was uneventful and fairly strenuous. We stopped off in Washington to see President Roosevelt and the Spewak show. Roosevelt was out of town. It would have been just as well if the Spewak show had also been out of town, although it had a lot of very funny stuff in it. Wednesday night I saw George Washington Slept Here. Very amusing, and the critics ought to be ashamed of themselves for the knifing they gave it. Thursday night I saw Hell's a Poppin', second time for me. I found it just as dirty and unfunny as I did last year. However, they are still selling out, and I'm sure they're not interested in my opinion. Friday night, the Ed Wynn Show. Utterly delightful, a master comic, not a dirty line or joke in the entire 2.5 hours. Saturday night, Al Lewis's Cabin in the Sky. Good singing, dancing, Ethel Waters in top form, and a quaint story. Sunday night at the Garden with Morris Ernst. Rangers and Americans, ice hockey. Tickets $2.20, ice fine, track fast. Met Ira Gershwin this morning in the coffee shop at the Essex. He had 3 newspapers under his arms and 4 bags under each eye. He told me he hadn't slept all night. Not worried, just keyed up. I'm sure you know the condition by now. I understand the show The Lady in the Dark is great. It's the story of Moss Hart's psychoanalytical career, and I probably will go to Boston for the opening. I'm leading a luxurious life. I'm sitting in the front rows at all the hits. I'm dining at the finest restaurants and drinking choice wines and liqueurs. The whole thing is costing me a fortune, and I doubt if I will have enough money to return west. My daughter Miriam has been sitting in her ski clothes for the past 3 days. She imagined New York was something like Switzerland, and that she would be streaking down long, snowy inclines, as they do in the advertisements for the Alps. If it doesn't snow in the next 2 weeks, I probably will have to take her to Lake Arrowhead when I return. Regards, Groucho.